Okay, hello again, everybody. It's me again, Dylan, your instructor. How's it going? So, I've been looking over some of the letters to the stakeholder that came in last night, and those were awesome, by and large. I had some emails and messages from people, like, as they were doing that exercise, they realized maybe that wasn't the right stakeholder that they should be focusing on, or maybe they needed more time or needed to rethink what exactly they were trying to argue with their stakeholder about, what they were trying to convince their stakeholder of, I should say. And that's excellent. For me, that's the part of the purpose of that assignment. So first, it kind of gets us to be in a headspace where we're considering that stakeholder or stakeholder group, let's say, as like actual people, first of all, because it uses direct address. But second of all, it's also useful for, figuring out some of those clarity things about what exactly we need, and what exactly we want out of this Unit 3 assignment. So, I've been really enjoying reading those. It's one of my favorite assignments. But we're going to continue on because you have an assignment that's due tomorrow night as well. And it's a relatively minor assignment, if you look and see. I think it says you just need a few hundred words. Or actually, we can look at it right now. Let me jump to the assignment. That is, and of course, like some of these are going to be changed and adapted. Yeah, write a 200-word explanation of what argumentative structure you would like to best suit your audience and argument, and why. Refer to readings earlier on in the semester about those different kinds of argument. I also got a message about that as well, and so for the sake of clarity, I'm going to go back to that particular reading and show you like where that might be. So it was a reading that we had earlier on in the semester, as a matter of fact. When I'm talking about forms of argument, I mean like argument to convince, argument to inform, that kind of thing. And those come from a particular reading that we had at the very beginning of the semester, as a matter of fact, on the second day. It came from this reading right here. So, you were first reading this, I'm assuming you all read it, but I'm asking you to possibly reread that now if you need to. At first you read it to get a sense of how we are going to be engaging with arguments over the course of the semester. At this point, since we're moving from analyzing arguments and looking at discourse to crafting your own arguments, this chapter also helps with that. And I think it's more geared towards the making of arguments. So it might make more sense now to read it, in fact, than at that point that we did. However, I think that this is also a very good thing to read at this point in the semester because it really shows the kind of scrutiny that you're going to need to have to apply to analyzing others' arguments, and that skill is still useful here as too. So that might vary depending on what kind of stakeholder you have, what kind of arguments they're making. You need to address those in some way, or think about them at least, in order to have a persuasive argument, let's say. All right, so continuing on from the sample that we looked at on Monday, I think. I don't remember anymore. Continuing on from my earlier video, we're going to use NFL players as the example stakeholder for my lesson today, because I think that we have a good amount of experience with this now. It's pretty easy to talk about them as a stakeholder. This is an interesting one, though, because while stakeholders, or I should say, while football players and athletes in general may have many things in common in terms of their profession and their interests, they're not some sort of monolith. They're not all the same, is what I'm trying to say. And so they're made up of groups of individuals, and that's really important. So one thing that I want to focus on is the distinction between those groups of stakeholders, or the stakeholders that consist of groups, and the specific stakeholders. So for your projects, you might find it more effective, I should say, to focus on a particular individual. There are differences in the things we are able to say about stakeholders depending on whether they are a group or whether it is an individual. We can, for instance, be much more specific when talking about a specific person, obviously. We can look at the things that they've done and said when looking for clues as to what might be most effective in terms of those rhetorical strategies that we use. That's different for a broad stakeholder group, though, because, for example, you can't assume that they have the same values as one another, or if they do, and I think it's likely that we have similar values, they still might not be defining them in the same way as one another. So if you think back to your unit, your English 1113, for those of you that took that, you had to do that sort of analysis, and that can come back here as well. So you'll have to approach things more generally when talking about a group. That still doesn't mean that they don't hold things in common, however, so those are the things that we're going to need to focus on. The other thing that I want you to keep in mind is that when we're analyzing our stakeholders, it's really important to proceed with an empathetic frame of mind. It's important that we're generous with our stakeholders. We need to approach the analysis of them from their perspective. And so it is important to ask ourselves at every step of the way, how does this group or this person see themselves? How do they conceive of themselves? Because we're always in making actions, in talking about things with people, we're always making and remaking and reiterating on ourselves. So how do they see themselves? We need to approach from that perspective. To make sure that we're doing this, I've talked a lot about how it's important to think about groups' desires and fears, or if you don't want to use those terms, what they want and don't want out of life or the situation that we're talking about, or the matter at hand, as well as the values that might be motivating that sort of worldview. Again, for those of you that got a lot out of 1113, that's going to help you here. So, in order to find the best forms of evidence and the rhetorical moves for our stakeholder, we kind of need to create a sense in our minds of who they are. And so I want you to really approach this project as a conversation that you're having with your stakeholder, as though they have the potential to respond to you. So if it helps, imagine that they're sitting right in front of you. And that's part of the purpose of that letter, again. So to the extent that we're going to be able to analyze our stakeholders and learn a lot about them, do research, that kind of thing, what I'm going to be doing today is creating a profile of my stakeholder, i.e. NFL players, such that I can use that when thinking about what I want to convince them of and how I want to do that. So let me flip over to another, let's see, I had this over here. Yes. So this is just a short little prompt, I guess. So these questions here will help us create a profile, basically, for our stakeholder. So what I have up here is the topic at hand, obviously, and for this particular essay, that's CTE. The stakeholder it's a little bit nebulous. So it was professional football players, but with a focus on those like just entering or about to enter the league for the most part. I think some of it also applied to players that have been in there for a while too, but I would say that it was more catering towards those wanting to enter, let's say. So we need to know what their relationship to the topic is. So, for instance, it would be pretty easy to say that these players, well, let's do it right here. Football, let's do it like this. Football, whatever, it'll just be bold. Football players are ones at risk of CTE, clearly. And so they would be like a profound subject for our, it's not unbolding, there we go. They would be a profound subject for our paper. So for instance, they are profoundly affected by the issue, but they are also able to make decisions with regard to that issue to affect change in it. The reason football exists at all is because there are people to play it. And if they want to make changes to that, or if they want to change what football looks like, or reformat it, or if they, as this paper suggests, if they want to make it such that there's like a sort of 4-year like rookie period, at which point, you know, we get new blood in there and thus minimize casualties, that's something that they can do. And so that is something worth mentioning as well. Tremendous amount of power in terms of decision making, at least to the extent that they can decide quite a bit, like before contracts are signed at the very least. Then we have demographic information. And I'm actually going to pause the video here and do some research in order to fill this out. I've already got a good start on it. Obviously, with the focus on those players just entering into the league, they're probably like 20 to 22 years old at the youngest, probably like 22, 23, getting out of college, that kind of thing. They're, of course, athletes, which has a mindset that can go along with it, possibly. They've all been, for instance, and had like similar experiences as athletes. They've been involved in competition, for instance. They've had to train with others. They have teams that they work with. These are all like experiences that can like have a profound impact on a person's mindset, a person's worldview, let's say. Another thing that I thought was interesting when just like thinking about what professional athletes like are as a category is that they're relatively few in number compared to all of the other people. So there might be like semi-professional people, for instance, and of course like amateurs, but those categories account for most of the athletes that exist, and as well as like just regular people wanting to like play a game or something like that, or do a run, you know, whatever, participate in an event. The amount of people that are in the NFL, for instance, as players, pales in comparison to the total amount of people that play football like around the world. It's like what, just over 30-something teams. I never remember how many there are, so don't crucify me there. But it's only so many teams with like alternates and, you know, people like subs waiting to play too, not just like the people starting. But still, that can't be more than a couple thousand people, if that. So this is a really important stakeholder group, but they are a sort of rarefied group at the same time. And it's really important because they are looked up to by, let's say, younger football players, for instance, of which there are many. So that's important to consider. The next thing that is important to consider as well are general values that they might hold in common, because as I said before, this is a stakeholder group, and so it's not necessarily going to be easy to see just based on, you know, one person's like statements about the subject or one person's anecdote. And I think that what this paper does, and what your papers can do, especially if you used a lot of, or you're thinking about a lot of anecdotes and stuff like that, is you're going to want to research like individuals, at least in terms of this subject, let's say, of NFL players. They thought it would be good to look at particular anecdotes from players, and I think that would be very helpful here, because that was not just like effective in terms of how to like put on the paper, but it was also effective to do in terms of research and figuring out who these people are. So that might be helpful in terms of your own topic too. If your topic has a lot of high profile people in it, or your stakeholder group, it would be important to like research them. If your the topic for your paper, your stakeholder, is an individual, then you should be doing everything in your power to research that individual. For instance, given that Donald Trump is the president and has a lot of say-so on matters of national interest, people often in my classes write to him and use him as the subject for their Unit 3 paper. And so there's a lot that we could tell about him because he's a very public figure, and he says a lot, and he does a lot, as a matter of fact. And he's had books written about him already, like even prior to becoming president. So I think that's a raft of research that you can utilize. Likewise here. So I'm going to pause it, and then I'm going to come back, and there should be more filled out here. Okay, so I'm back now. I've just added a little bit more to this because I think what I had was a pretty good start at first, just to get going and thinking about the stakeholder. Obviously, you might like refine this as you go along, or the idea or image you have in your head of your stakeholder. That's okay. But for the purposes of like just starting out, obviously, we want to like keep it a little bit brief, but with enough detail that you have stuff to work off of. So I determined, like, I did a little research, and I found that a lot of the players nowadays seem to be like from ages 21 to 23, and that comes from this article, like this is like a year and a half ago now, but I think it's still probably like relevant. Most of the average age of first round picks in the draft are 21.7 years old. So I said I skewed probably younger, 21 to 23 or thereabouts. And in fact, they have another chart here that sort of illustrates that. So you have people that are like committing to the draft before they graduate, and then you have people that are like drafting, you know, after they're done with their senior year, that kind of thing. All right, so it has a very varied racial background. I mean, that should be pretty obvious just from like cursory observation of the league. However, the majority of them are African American, and the majority of players come from anywhere from like really low class backgrounds to middle class economic status, and that comes from this article right here, which I can't open right now, but it's there, that kind of stuff. So just a little bit of research went into this, and this stuff, to find this, took me like 10 minutes, and it was just a case of like saying average age of NFL rookies. So bam, that's the first link, and 538 is a pretty reputable source in terms of statistics and analysis, and you see they cite their sources as well, ProFootballReference.com. That is definitely a reputable source on football stats. So that's pretty good. For the other stuff, I looked for economic status of the NFL draft. I thought this was interesting. Let's exploit some college students. An economist's view on the NFL draft. And then there was this quote here that he uses, that he found in a New York Times article. This guy said that the NFL treats the players like the finest Wagyu cattle. And so that, to me, stuck out. So then I went and I looked for the article itself. And boom, found it. So that's the relatively easy, process of like doing some research. That's what I would like for you to do. So these search terms were really not that sophisticated at all. These are really, really broad. As you can see, I got like a whole lot of stuff for especially this search. Stuff that's not really related to that at all. Or rather, I should say, was it economic status NFL draftees? Where does NFL talent come from? Yeah, and I started finding that kind of stuff. So you can really do, as we've been talking about, do the work of going down the rabbit hole insofar as your particular stakeholder and define research about them. So build that profile out. As we said before, they're athletes. That comes with a bunch of other things, which I'll get into shortly. And again, they're relatively few in number. So that's a very, I should add to that, this is a very prestigious position to be a professional player or professional athlete. To be able to do that, you have to be both very good and or like quite lucky, but probably very good and have done a lot of work in order to get there. So it comes with a certain amount of status to it, certainly socially, culturally, but also economically too. Like as the paper was saying, millions of dollars. So that's an important thing to think about. All right, what are some general values that they might hold in common? Well, I thought about it, and I used athleticism as sort of like the basis for this. And so I thought about values that might be associated or could come out of, the experience of being an athlete. I imagined what that would be like, and I've also, used my own experiences to help like get a sense of what that might be, because believe it or not, I also played sports in school. I think most people probably did, or were made to at the very least. So I get a sense it should be pretty easy to make those identifications or make those empathetic leaps in trying to understand your stakeholder. That's what I'm doing here. So I thought about athleticism, and of course there was like teamwork, and so you could say also like associated with that is cooperation, of course. There's the idea of competition. That's a very motivating factor for many people, to be the best, let's say, or for fun, who knows, and let's say maybe to get paid. I don't know. There are a whole lot of reasons for why people like value competition, let's say, or like why competition is like the value for them. Then we also have determination. That's something that you probably learn very quickly as a rookie player of any kind or amateur player. You're going to fail a lot. You're going to do bad. But you should be able to get something out of that. And so that's sort of me putting myself in that mindset there and thinking about that. Also, along with athleticism and knowing how athletics works, there's also the values of mentorship, or the value of mentorship that goes along there, and that comes out of like both with your both with your older athletes that, for instance, you look up to, whether that be like you as a kid looking up to them on TV and seeing what they have to say and what they have to do and learn that way, or like in the experience of being on a team, you working with older players who have been around the block, done it a bit, and they want to pass that stuff on to you as well through that experience of working together. Likewise, it also appears with coaching as well. That to me goes along with mentorship too. Trying to learn from the coach who has seen many teams, many players, that kind of thing. And co-constitutive with that is trust, because you obviously need trust and have a certain value of trust and understanding of that before this stuff becomes useful at all, or like trust is the foundation of like mentorship and coaching. If you don't believe what somebody's trying to teach you, then that's not gonna you're not gonna get anything out of that. So I think that this is a pretty good profile of athletes, and this was me just thinking about professional football players on my own. I didn't really think about what the sample was doing, but now that I look back on the sample and the things that I was saying on Monday, as a matter of fact, or like in my video, I should say, I can see that, all right, we're getting a lot of experiences of other players here, players that came before them, especially like that the author was using and invoking as examples, as anecdotes, and I think I mentioned this, in fact, in that video. That invokes certain ideas of mentorship in terms of how it relates to athleticism. So these are just a really like quick and dirty are these categories here, and I'm pointing at my screen but you can't see these categories here and ideas and questions. The answers to these will give you a pretty robust profile of your stakeholder, such that you can think about what you want to focus on rhetorically in terms of your paper. So for instance, what does Donald Trump best respond to, let's say? I don't know. I'd have to do some research about that. Would he respond more to a really pushy argument, telling him to do things, or would he be more receptive to an argument that emphasizes, either the economic aspect of it or the economics-esque aspect of it, if you frame it in terms of a deal, let's say, because he talks a lot about deals and deal making, and that for him is a really important thing, and he does want to look good in terms of this, as I assume that anybody would in terms of undertakings, let's say. I mean, and it depends on your topic too. But if you approach it in terms of making a deal with Donald Trump, I think that he would be more receptive to that in some way. So this is what I want you to do, basically, in response to this discussion board. This will be this response. I just want you to basically answer these 3 questions and have your topic and then have your stakeholder, your particular stakeholder. And as you can see, this is a very specific one. I want to know what their relation to their topic is. I want to know who they are in terms of their demographic information. So obviously you want to be as specific as possible with whatever you find there. And obviously, if it's a specific individual that you're talking about, you can probably narrow down this stuff even more than we have here. But for professional football players, there's obviously a lot of people involved in that. So these are just generalizations. which might be more effective at doing certain things and less effective at others. So just keep that in mind, as I was talking about before in the terms of the distinctions between individual and group stakeholders. I also want you to hypothesize some values that your stakeholder or stakeholders might have. So for me, I thought about athleticism and all the things that sort of stem from that. Athleticism being, in this case, the worldview. And obviously there might be other worldviews associated with this, but this was just a good start to get me thinking about that. Alright, so what I would like for you to do is and you don't have to make this in a document, you could just do it in a post. Have your topic, your stakeholder, and I want you to answer these 3 things. And I don't know if it'll let you do bullet points in those responses. It's fine if it doesn't. You can use sentence format, that's fine. But I want you to respond to this. That response will be due next week, next Monday. So it'll be due, let's say, Monday night. So this will, of course, also help you do the assignment tomorrow. So I would suggest getting this done quickly, let's say, and then turn that in. But for just the response, I'm making this one due a little bit later on, and especially because it's, as I'm recording this, it's Thursday night, so I think that's enough time for this kind of thing. But we're still ironing out stuff, so it's fine if it takes a few days. So this is what I want you to do. Make it more or less like this. This isn't very detailed, to be honest. You can get more detailed with it. This is about the level of detail that I would want for that assignment. And so it will appear to you in your assignments, this discussion board, as well as just when you click on the discussion board tab too. So if there are any questions, you can always email me. You can offer a comment on that discussion board. I would be more than happy to answer the questions. But this week has been about talking about the stakeholder analysis, and next week will be tailoring to those specific stakeholders a little bit more in terms of the rhetorical things that we do. So that will be stuff like ethos, pathos, and logos. It'll be stuff like anticipating counter arguments, as well as offering concessions to our stakeholders in order to get them on board with us. We'll be talking about that. And so I'll probably put up a video next week, but there will also be 2 audio podcast type things to listen to as well. So I'll put those up, and yeah, class is still trucking along. The last thing that I have to talk about, though, is the rough draft for Unit 3, which I know many people are want to know about. So I'm making it due on April the 8th. All right. It says in the schedule, as a matter of fact, that it's due on the 6th, if I remember correctly. Yeah, but that's just workshop week. And right now we're not having workshop. We're not doing conferences in person. And as you can see here, I didn't even have conferences scheduled because I think that at this point, if you want a conference with me, you can have it if you would like. I will have office hours this week, basically, of a sort, if you want to talk to me, for instance, via Zoom. But you don't have to, basically. So we'll be doing rough drafts on this week. It'll be due on the 8th. I'm going to put that assignment up right after I'm done uploading this discussion with this video. And when you turn in your rough draft, you will be assigned a peer review partner. And that peer review will also be part and parcel with the grade for that rough draft. So I will be evaluating your peer review for that piece, as well as looking at, and seeing what you were doing. I'll also offer my commentary on it as well, but it'll be rather brief. If you would like more detailed feedback, you can get in touch with me, much like we've done in the before with conferences. So it should be pretty easy to reach me in that instance, but we'll talk about, what that consists of more on, that week. We still have next week to worry about, and we'll be looking at the next sample. I think I swapped these around, yeah. We'll be looking at the next sample on Monday. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch. Otherwise, yeah, get to work on that tailoring that argument structure, let's say, assignment. If you have any questions about that, please put them in the discussion board, because I think that could be very useful to the rest of the class.